Welcome all to Gunning to Old Trafford. Wow, what a day. As an Arsenal supporter, I am totally blown away today. As you guys can see, I'm gonna pass it on to Ibrahim to do the introductions. I can't stop smiling. I've got a Manchester United pillow next to me, as you guys can see, and I'm going to be keeping it very well. It's going to be keeping me comfortable for this afternoon. And yeah, Ibrahim, take us in.
Yeah, guys, welcome to the channel again, and apologies if I look like a kid in a candy store, because I literally am in every Manchester United fan's candy store, you know. So we have an amazing guest with us, but before we get into that, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you know when the content drops. Today, I think we have one of the biggest Manchester United fans in South Africa on the channel. It's an amazing honor. Dr. Barry Schmeizer, lifelong and avid Manchester United fan. He was the chairman, or is the chairman, of the Manchester United Supporters Club, renowned gastroenterologist, and everyday human being, and a very amazing person. So Doc, welcome to the channel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for hosting me. I'm looking forward to this.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. Wow. So Doctor, just to start, like Ibrahim said, myself included, we are like kids in a candy store. This memorabilia is blowing our mind away. Doc, this is amazing. Absolutely amazing. So we're going to start off, Doc, and before we start off, I have a small little question for you. Have you ever played football? And how were you introduced to Manchester United Football Club?
Of course, all of us have played football, and as a kid I was a very keen football player, but I was useless. So that's why I became a doctor.
That makes two of us, Doc.
So for me, it used to be a great achievement at school if I could get into the B team. If there was a C team, I'd be in that team. But the enthusiasm was there.
Awesome.
But I knew from a very young age that I wouldn't be setting the fields of Old Trafford or Wembley alight.
Awesome. And yeah, Doc, so we understand the most important, and a question I think the viewers want to know is that what brought you and when did you start supporting this giant of a club, Manchester United?
Yeah, so I'm probably coming up for almost my 60th anniversary of being a Man United supporter.
Wow.
And like most kids of that day in the early to mid 60s, I was very influenced by my older cousins. So I had a cousin who was an avid Man United fan, or as big a fan one could be from this part of the world. And you know what, you do, you're impressionable, so you follow suit.
Yeah. Yes.
Which I'm really thankful I did, because my father, my late dad, was a Chelsea supporter, so it could have turned out very badly for me. But I followed the instincts that my cousin had put into me. And you know, back in those times, there was no television here. The only news we'd get was exactly like your fantastic previous guest, Uncle Eunice.
Oh, yes.
Mentioned listening to the BBC World Service on shortwave 2, that you'd be straining your ears to hear Paddy Feeney and all these guys giving comments. And then during the week, 1:45 in the morning, you'd go stand outside with the aerial out of the radio to get the results. And there'd be occasional newspaper clippings. So we really were starved of information back in those days. And it was only when television started in sort of the mid-70s that we became privy to watching games. But before then, we'd all, when I say we, myself and my schoolmates, we'd all built up a tremendous interest in the game.
Awesome.
And there used to be places that showed match of the day a week after the games were played, etc. But the fire had been fueled long before then.
Amazing.
And of course, being a Man United supporter in the 60s was a good time. The 70s were some very dire times. And, you know, during the 70s, of course, we were relegated at the end of the 73-74 season. And I was the target of derision of many of my schoolmates who were Liverpool fans. But boy, we've extracted revenge. And if there's a take-home message with respect to that, if you're talking football, and the guy's a gastroenterologist, don't go to him for a colonoscopy unless you support the same team.
And we at that topic now. I'm an avid Arsenal supporter. Much young. What is the view of your patients walking in your surgery? Because we heard a lot about your surgery.
Yeah, there are a few photos.
And
a few is a bit of an
a few
understatement.
photos is an understatement. And what's it take on when they walk in this shrine of Manchester United and they're a Liverpool supporter? I'm sure that the stomach doesn't do well after that.
So some of them are a bit upfront initially, but I've sworn the Hippocratic Oath, so I have to do my best for everybody.
Yes.
But mostly it's a confession after they come and see me for sort of the 7th or 8th time. They'll say, I've got something to tell you. I say to them, I know. Is it Liverpool or Arsenal?
Okay.
So that's but it's a great source of discussion. And imagine if we all supported the same team. It would be horrific.
Exactly.
So, I think we all love the game.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the game has changed tremendously. But we must have respect for all the clubs. But there are certain clubs that stand out as great clubs over the history of football, and many of them that our younger supporters are not aware of. If you look at clubs like Aston Villa, Newcastle, these are clubs that in recent years have not had much success at all. Yet they are great clubs.
Giants, yes.
So we have to have respect
And I think
for
on that-
everyone.
Awesome.
On that, we were just talking about Newcastle United in one of our previous segments, and the history that the clubs have is amazing.
Yeah.
And now with the ownership structure, outside of Mike Ashley, someone that's probably going to put money into the club as opposed to taking it out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure we're going to see Newcastle, get back to the heights of maybe. the old
It's
days.
certainly looking good for them.
Yeah.
And you know what? They're pleasing on the eye. They're a nice team to watch.
You know what I love about them, and before Arteta came to Arsenal, I actually wanted them to get Eddie Howe in, a superb manager. I think he's going to be at Newcastle for the long run.
Well, he'll be at Newcastle as long as Newcastle is successful.
Exactly.
True that.
And
yes.
the week that they're not successful, his head will roll.
He's
Yeah.
going to get chopped off.
As happens.
But very
100%.
talented. I like him.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Newcastle, keep on moving.
Doc, I'm going to take us back a bit, and something that struck me is you're supporting Manchester United probably from the early to mid '60s, and as a Manchester United fan myself, just hearing stories about the Busby babes and Sir Matt Busby, you were introduced to them while they were playing, leading up to that '68 Champions League final. What was the experience supporting Manchester United at that time and hearing the names of Law, Charlton, Best playing under Sir Matt?
I think that the Munich air crash was responsible. It got United the kind of sympathy vote amongst many neutral fans. And the Munich air crash was a few months before I was born, so, it's really before my time. So we've got to rely on accounts by people. The players that survived generally have not enjoyed speaking about it, and it's only in occasional interviews that they have. Matt Busby the same. I mean, Matt Busby blamed himself for it for many years. So the European Cup became the holy grail for Man United, in respect of the memory of those who lost their lives. And let's remember that in that air crash, it wasn't only players who lost their lives, it was staff of the club, and it was cabin crew, and it was fellow passengers. So this became United's holy grail. And of course, the team had to be completely rebuilt. The mind boggles, had that crash not occurred, at just what that team could have achieved. Because they potentially could have done what Real Madrid did in terms of winning all those early European Cups, because they were certainly almost at their standards, and they were an extremely young team. So they had to rebuild. And of course, the names that roll off the tongue are the Holy Trinity, Charlton, Law and Best. Mm-hmm. And I mean, wow, it's virtually indescribable just how good those three were. And opinions vary, and that's what's great about following football. Right. You ask one guy, he'll say Charlton is the best player United have had. And next one will say Dennis Law was. Next one, including myself, will say George Best was. Yeah. So therein lies the beauty. But there were other players that it got built around. Billy Folks, who was a survivor of the Munich air crash, Nobby Stiles, who came in, pair of full-backs in Shea Brennan and Tony Dunn, and then, of course, and Paddy Crerand, who we acquired from Celtic. And the first step in terms of getting there was winning the FA Cup in 1963. The league followed in 65 and 67. And then, of course, the European Cup, as it was known then, not the Champions League.
Sure.
And it was a much shorter tournament because the only participants were clubs that had won their domestic leagues. And United had some interesting opposition in that build-up to the final. And, of course, the game that gets cited even more than that final was the semi-final 2 years before, where we slaughtered Benfica 5-1 in their own backyard. And then, of course, unfortunately, George Best got injured and was unable to play in the semi-finals against Partizan, to whom we lost. That's amazing. That 60s was building time for the club. And I mean, the supporters sing today, playing football the Busby way. And that was it. Go out and enjoy yourself. And his philosophy was, people are spending their hard-earned money to come and watch you. Don't let them down.
Exactly. Oh, brilliant. And I think Sir Alex Ferguson carried on that, that tradition of, it's for the fans. Make sure that you come out and give your all for Manchester United.
You see, I think if we look at the history of the club, certainly post-Second World War, there have been two dynasties, the Busby and the Ferguson dynasties, and a kind of rebuild between. And we find ourselves, that old cliche of history repeating itself. We find ourselves in exactly the same situation today.
And maybe it's a 10 hard.
So maybe it's going to be very fascinating to see how that plays out.
Yeah. But we'll get there. You mentioned the name Paddy Crerand. And I seen one of these up-and-coming YouTube stars called I Show Speed. And they brought him to Old Trafford recently, And the disrespect he showed to Paddy Crerand when he was doing an interview with him just blew my mind about how these youngsters don't understand the history of a football club and the sweat and tears and effort that Manchester United, today known as a great club, was built on their shoulders back in the day. So.
Very much so. I think it's something that the players appreciate. I think the players have drummed into them the history of the club and what it stands for. But we're in days of social media. It's a completely different thing. When they have these votes for the top United players ever, and no disrespect him, but Eric Cantona comes out as number one. Yeah. Not a chance, But that's in the eyes of the younger fans today. So, it's all subjective. We can throw stats at it. Sometimes they make for very interesting reading, and sometimes they can change an argument. But, to hear that a guy like Paddy Crerand is treated with disrespect, that's a disgrace.
Yeah, exactly.
Terrible.
So, Doc, and again, we just, as it comes to mind, we're going to push through. Yeah. So, the 60s were amazing, and, we had a few Ballon d'Or winners in the 60s. Three Ballon d'Or winners. The Trinity all won it. Won the Ballon d'Or. And then, like every era or every dynasty, they start fading as they get older. Yeah. And Samed Busby and his team obviously started, the team started moving out, age caught up with them. And you touched on it earlier, the 70s was not the best time to be a Manchester United fan, and Uncle Eunice mentioned it when he spoke to us, and you picked on it. As a United fan who's seen that success and then feel the turning, what was your thoughts and what similarities do you bring to the current team?
Yeah, it's a good question. Firstly, it's always a good time to be a Man United supporter, no matter where they are, where they're playing, who they're playing, because you're a United supporter. You're part of a special family. And as I've probably mentioned, possibly in other interviews before, you can be at a game sitting next to a guy. He can be a mass murderer, but he will be your brother for 90 minutes if you support the same team. And that's what it does. If you meet strangers, somehow, if you can divert the conversation to revolve around football, you become part of it.
Definitely.
So it's kind of either in your blood or it's not.
Exactly.
But the problem with United in the 60s, as we've seen with so many clubs, is the squad all aged together, and there wasn't sufficient planning for the future. And they became more and more reliant on George Best. He was their top scorer for 5 seasons in a row. He wanted change in the team, and it wasn't coming, so he kind of lost interest and unfortunately went down a bad path. Matt Busby's successor was always going to be interesting. Who's it going to be? Much like when Fergie appointed a successor. And in retrospect, was the wrong person to appoint, because I appointed Wolf McGuinness, who in fact was younger than some of the players that he was managing. And McGuinness played in the era of the Busby Babes.
Wow.
Unfortunately, he suffered a very bad leg break, which ended his career. So he became the manager, and he couldn't do it. It really got the better of him. And that saw Matt Busby reinstated for a short while. And then, of course, we went through Frank O'Farrell, Tommy Docherty, Dave Sexton, Ron Atkinson, and then came Fergie.
Wow.
And each of those managers added a little bit. Frank O'Farrell was responsible for bringing Martin Buchan to Man United, who probably was United's best player of the 70s. Tommy Docherty brought swashbuckling football to United. Yes, we were relegated, but we bounced straight back. And in fact, the first season we came back, we came third in the league, and we lost the FA Cup final, unfortunately, to Southampton, which I think is probably the last movie I cried in. And then it's well publicised that he had an affair with the club physio, so he got dismissed.
Oh, man.
And then came Dave Sexton, who was regarded by many as an excellent coach, but quite a dour human being. And in fact, in his last season, despite winning the last 7 games on the trot, he was dismissed, and Champagne Ron came in.
And brought Brian Robson with him.
And well, that I would say is the biggest contribution that Ron Atkinson made, was orchestrating the signing of Brian Robson, because one could wax lyrical about Robson for hours.
I mean, on that, Abdul, if you allow me to, I was watching a documentary about Brian Robson on DSTV at the moment. And his brother, his younger brother, just signed for West Brom because he thought that, with his elder brother there, it will help him grow into the team.
Yes.
And as soon as he signed, a couple of weeks later,
off he went.
Brian Robson went to Manchester United. So that was
off he went. And when Brian Robson signed for United, of course, it was done on the field with Martin Edwards, the then chairman, and Robbo's got this permed hair. And they watched the game, and who has he been signed to replace? Probably Sammy McElroy, who during that game proceeds to score a hat-trick. But, he was wonderful.
I mean, football just writes itself. It's amazing.
There's always, it probably relates to all clubs, but whenever United are involved in any game or anything, there is a subplot to it. There's always a subplot.
So there's always, Doc, we myself and Ibrahim, after every night, after the last game of the World Cup, we go on Instagram Live. And Ibrahim was just telling the viewers that, yes, we have the World Cup now, but Manchester United is still grabbing all the headlines with what's happening. So giant club. And he teases them a lot. So Doc, Ibrahim, if you allow me, I just have one question, just came in my head. Doc, have you ever met any of the Arsenal players? If I may, I had to ask this question.
I've met United players that have played for Arsenal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Please tell us more.
Viv Anderson.
Viv Anderson,
Frank Stapleton.
I know Frank Stapleton.
Who was one of my favourite United players, even though he scored against us in the 79 Cup final. I've met Danny Welbeck, who went on to play for Arsenal.
That's more or less
Mikhail Silvestri played for both clubs.
Both clubs.
And I'll tell you a piece of trivia that once got asked to me, and I didn't know the answer, but Jim Leighton, who I never met, but played for Arsenal in one friendly game.
Wow.
But there are other players that have played for both that just don't.
Robin van Persie.
God, RVP.
Van Persie.
RVP, but I've not met Van Persie personally.
Okay.
But of course.
But you know that little boy. I like to give it to
and then Ibrahim goes.
The little boy cried out for Manchester United, which was all.
Well, you see, I think then again, maybe a good example of Ferguson's management. The season before Van Persie was signed, we lost the league on goal difference. And that, I have to say, was a very bitter pill to swallow. And what does he do? He goes out and he says to himself, I need a guy that's going to come and score 30 goals for us. Now, at the start of that season, if you would have said that Van Persie's coming to United, I mean, what drugs are you taking?
Not a chance.
Not a chance.
I mean, because at that time he was playing the best football of his life.
Yeah.
And was injury-free,
Correct.
which was a big thing for him. So that was an unbelievable signing.
Absolutely amazing.
It just takes me back to, and I mentioned to you off camera, I'm watching a documentary about the Galacticos. And when the then president, who's the current president of Real Madrid, came in and to get his campaign going, he said he'll go and get Luis Figo.
Yeah.
And he did just that,
Yeah.
you know, from bitter rivals.
Yeah.
And I mean, Wenger and Ferguson, obviously, the bitter rivalry. And he said, identify him as the right striker. And he went in and got him. It's amazing.
Yeah.
The pull that Ferguson had,
Yeah.
also Alex had
Incredible.
in football.
And, you know, the other thing is Ferguson partnered with David Gill, and they were a formidable combination. And I don't know if we'll discuss later, but I mean, watching the likes of Ed Woodward running the club, for me, has been utterly revolting.
And I think we mentioned it as well before. It wasn't just Sir Alex leaving, but David Gill leaving at the same time was a big mistake on Manchester United.
Very influential departure from United.
And Ronaldo mentioned it in his exit interview as well. But we'll get into that as we go.
You see, I think David Gill was a very good conduit between Ferguson and the Glazers,
Yeah.
whereas Ed Woodward was a puppet of the Glazers.
Exactly.
And just coming back to the Arsenal thing, let's not forget Alexis Sanchez,
Yes.
who I have to say I'm very pleased I've never gotten to meet.
Oh, yes.
But at Arsenal,
He was
magnificent.
Tremendous.
I don't know.
And I think to your point about Ed Woodward, that was a move that he manufactured outside of what Jose Mourinho wanted at that particular point in time.
You see, for me, the most frustrating thing is, as a supporter, I'm not privy to exactly what's going on inside there.
Yeah.
I am, like most of us, I'm subject to social media.
Yeah.
And I have to say, unless it's by one or two people, I don't believe a thing that's written there.
Yeah.
Because we are linked with 150 players every transfer window.
Exactly.
And it's just so tedious.
Yeah.
It really is. It's become tedious. And when you look at how other clubs do business, and for example, if you look at Liverpool, Arsenal, Real Madrid, Barca, they identify a player, the player comes. There's no hype for 3 months beforehand.
Exactly.
Will he come, won't he come? I mean, I'm still waiting for Man United to sign Wesley Sneijder. You know? And what went on in this last transfer window with Frankie de Jong.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
What a mess.
really. It's
You're either
just-
signing him or you're not, right?
that's
Let's
it.
move on.
That's it.
Exactly.
And what it does is it poisons the minds of the supporters with respect to that player.
Correct.
I mean, he may have done nothing wrong,
Exactly.
but it does. And I think most of the time it's the agents who are responsible. They're trying to drive their salaries up.
Correct.
You know, they go to the club and say, oh, these guys want to sign my guy. If you don't raise his salary, you know, he'll leave, wada.
And also in the modern day, you mentioned it earlier, social media, it's all about the clicks and the exposure, the impressions. And I think Manchester United, when that focus changed from football onto marketing, I don't think they mind these noises going out because it creates
Very much
noise around the club and
Very
it
much
drives their share price, you know.
Very much so.
So-
Well, I am only 499,999,000 followers behind Ronaldo on Instagram. So I'm getting there.
Doc, we'll reduce that a bit.
I'm
Going
getting
to Old
there.
Trafford will definitely hit a bump in that number. So, Doc, Abdul asked you about Arsenal players that you might have met. I'm not going to ask you which Manchester United player you met because, you know, as I'm looking here to our guests, the amount of players and staff that you met is amazing. But, Doc, just maybe a special relationship that you maybe created with a staff or player over the years that you maybe want to bring up?
Yeah, so look, I've been very fortunate. It's all about who you know. You know, there are people who live 1 block away from the stadium who've never been to watch a game.
Yeah.
So all about who you know. So in 1983, I was making my first trip to Manchester. And of course, there was a book that you guys are not familiar with called the telephone book in those days. And I got hold of the telephone book and I looked up Roy Bailey, Gary's father.
Okay.
And Gary, of course, was playing for United at the time. And I phoned Roy Bailey, didn't know who I was. I introduced myself. And I said, I'm going to Manchester. Do you think there's any chance I could get to meet Gary and maybe watch the team training? And he had a parcel that he wanted to send for Gary.
Oh,
So I was the courier.
That's amazing.
Fully legal parcel, I might add. And he gave me his phone number, and I met Gary at the Cliff at the old training ground. Now, that training ground, up until just over 2 decades ago, is where United trained from the Second World War onwards. It was the most... but the facilities were atrocious. Never mind they're complaining now. But it really was so basic. But that's what teams did in those days. So I met Gary, and he very kindly got us tickets for a couple of games. And he introduced me to a fellow there called Barry Moorhouse. Now, Barry was the chap who was the liaison with overseas supporters clubs. And eventually, in 1990, we established a supporters club in South Africa. And Barry Moorhouse became our contact person over there. So whenever I or like-minded folk from the supporters club would make a trip, I'd always contact Barry. And the Cliff was open to the public, except the day before a game. Okay. But Barry gave me a letter that enabled me to actually stand on the pitch at the Cliff. So you saw all these players, and it was just incredible. And in those days, quite a few people would come into the training ground, and the players, if they were pleasant, would sign autographs afterwards and things like that. And it was really a friendly atmosphere. But then the Cliff got updated, and United opened this training ground at Carrington, outside of Manchester. And it was a no-go area, no supporters allowed. And lo and behold, I'm sure most people will be familiar with the name Carlos Queiroz.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
So Carlos Queiroz, whom I must stress, I don't speak about people's medical issues, but the man is in excellent health. He came to see me as a patient in Johannesburg, just after he'd been dismissed by Bafana. And he came to see me at my office, where, as I mentioned, there are quite a few pictures hanging. We didn't say one word about football. It was totally professional.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, a couple of weeks later, I'm watching Sky News, and I see he's been appointed as Fergie's successor. And I see this broadcast that was 11:20 at night. I got in my car, I went to my office to get his file out with his phone number in it. And I called him near midnight. Okay. I said to him, why didn't you tell me? He said, no, he was negotiating with the club. He couldn't say anything. But then came the magic words. When you're next in Manchester, please get hold of me.
Oh my goodness.
And from that has forged a friendship that lasts to this day. In fact, I've been in touch with him while he's in Qatar at the moment. And so it's lasted. And I used to spend quite a bit of time with him in Manchester. I'd go to the training ground where I was gained admission, and that was better than going to a match.
You got admission to Carrington?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And I was able to take pictures out on the field. At one stage, they stopped you from taking any pictures while the players were training, because they didn't want other teams to see who was injured or anything like that. And then everyone would have lunch in the canteen, where I never took a camera. But
of obvious reasons.
I was privileged to sit with Carlos and Fergie probably 10 times over there. And Fergie takes a while to understand the English that he speaks. Okay. And as long as you tell him that Glasgow is the best city in the world, he likes you. Okay. And there were some very interesting meetings. And then, on a Friday night, the team would go and stay in a hotel before the game. And I used to meet Carlos on that Friday night when all the team were tucked away in bed, supposedly. And, we became good friends. That's amazing. So he is the closest I've kind of gotten over there, and a wonderful fellow. I miss him at United. He, of course, has had 2 stints there, because he went to Real Madrid for the one season, where, in fact, we went to visit him, and through him we watched the game and met in inverted commas, stood for a photo and got an autograph from the Galacticos. And then, of course, back in Manchester. And then his next job was the Portuguese national team for the World Cup here. So he's really been quite a nomadic fellow over the years, because he's also been at Colombia, at Egypt, at Iran.
And now in Iran,
And he's doing
his
amazing
first
stuff
World Cup
with Iran.
win, oh man.
Yeah.
Amazing
But
stuff.
what a wonderful fellow, and a very highly regarded coach.
I mean, if you and again, I'm just going to based on what I've listened to in the media, Rio Ferdinand was talking about Carlos Queiroz, because he was there for a bit of a stint, and he says he's one of the best coaches he ever got introduced to.
If you read Gary Neville's book, he also speaks very highly of his coaching methods.
Yeah. So I mean, big up to Carlos Queiroz, and we wish him all the best at the World Cup.
And local Roger Desai as well.
Yeah, Roger Desai as well.
Awesome.
Yeah. So Doc, you mentioned there a bit around at the start, and then you hinted at in the 90s when the supporters club was formed. In what capacity were you involved in the early stages, and has that relationship carried on over the years?
Yeah, there were a few like-minded of us that spoke about starting a supporters club. And in fact, Gary Bailey was living here at the time, and he lent much credence. I mean, to have an ex-player as part of it is just fantastic. And a shout out to him as well, because he's God's gentleman. He's a lovely guy. So that was the roots of it. And then we had this executive committee of which Eunice was part of, and myself, and a wonderful fellow, the late Rob Hyman, who might be known to some people that, listen to this. And so it gathered momentum. And Rob Hyman was a very dynamic person. He was the initial secretary of the club. And he used to liaise with Old Trafford. Wow. Now, in those days, remember, no social media. Mm-hmm. So Rob used to speak to Barry Moorhouse and used to find out who's injured, who's in the lineup, or in the mix for the lineup for the weekend. What's the latest news? Wow. And the other thing is, we used to get a video sent to us from the club. There was a single camera mounted on the grandstand roof.
Oh my.
No commentary, and it just showed the game from one view. And we used to have these meetings, and we'd hang on to every second of these things. And the meetings grew very large. We used to have several hundred people at a meeting. But then, of course, when DSTV comes, when the games are on live, when there's all the social media, the numbers dwindle to a few faithful. But there's been a tremendous sense of continuity. And the big thing about the Supporters Club is it's given access to official members in terms of going to watch games at Old Trafford. That's probably its major service that it's given to fans. And also a collective in terms of watching games together. But many people prefer watching the games in the confines of their own homes.
Yeah, 100%.
And, when you go to a sports bar, for example, there's always someone there to niggle. There's always the dude in the Liverpool shirt. That's the
ready
problem.
to.
That's always
the
the problem.
The guy in the Arsenal shirt we don't see as a threat. He's okay.
He's okay.
It's the Scouser.
It's the Scouser.
Yeah.
And Doc, earlier on we spoke when we started about respect. I remember very fondly the rivalry between Arsene Wenger and Alex Ferguson. Yeah. And do you know, Ibrahim, the last game at Manchester United, Alex Ferguson came out and handed Arsene Wenger his plaque, the immortal trophy. So just to elaborate on the respect, they were fierce competitors on the field, but the respect they had for one another was amazing.
Yes. So if you look in the late 90s, Arsenal were United's major opposition.
Correct.
And Fergie and Wenger were bitter rivals on the field. But there's no question about it, mutual respect.
Yeah,
there's absolutely no question about it. And I think Arsene Wenger is one of the greatest managers that's lived. And what he's shown also, not only has he left a legacy there, but his ongoing work in football. And they don't call him the professor for nothing.
True that.
But Fergie is another story. That is just a giant of a man.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I think maybe that's a perfect segue then, Doc. As chairman of the Manchester United Supporters Club, and you mentioned that you met Sir Alex Ferguson, what influence did the Supporters Club have in Manchester United touring South Africa? And will we see a tour in the future? Or
Yeah.
do you think something like that could ever
Yeah.
happen again?
So I have to say, I think that the supporters club, I'd love to say that we were the major influence in their touring here, but we weren't. And it all relates to sponsors.
Okay.
And that being the case, I doubt very much in the foreseeable future that we will see Man United visit South Africa. I think that we are but a small blip on the radar for them. They obviously want to foster good relations with us. And in fact, they were a little bit concerned. A number of years ago, I think you'll remember, Eunice, that there was a marketing issue where a particular clothing brand over here were going to take over the distribution of Man United memorabilia and things like that. And suddenly came this delegation from Manchester that wanted to meet with us. And my mind is cloudy with respect to those events. So we were kind of okay then. But, you know, at their current exchange rate and the sponsors that they've got, you know, there's not enough money I don't think, to bring them here.
You know, Doc, I worked at MTN for a small stint, maybe 18 months. And at that time, MTN were a sponsor of Manchester United.
Yes.
And they did tour South Africa at that time, but I was a junior
Yes.
at the time. So I didn't get to meet the players, but they did come to the 14th Avenue office.
Their last tour to South Africa, in fact, was at the start of the 2012-13 season.
Yeah.
That's when they came. And I have to say that they did allow, it got almost a little bit ugly, in as much as when the team were in Cape Town, they allowed us 20 supporters could come and meet the players after their training stint. Now, I can tell you that firstly, the training that night, it was bucketing with rain. Now, how do you choose 20 people?
Exactly.
How do you do that? So we put names in a hat, okay? So now you queued up waiting, and they've come in and they're all sopping wet. Are they going to stop and have a conversation with you? It was a quick autograph, and that was the end of it. And I just think that side of things they could have improved on in terms of the marketing.
Okay.
When they played in Durban, they played Amazulu first. And again, I wasn't at the supporters meeting, but a limited group were allowed access to meet the players at the Oyster Box Hotel. And again, you've got so many people. You put 20 supporters in a room. The room's got 200 chairs. Why don't you put 200 supporters inside there? So, so we've felt a little bit marginalized with respect to that. But this is modern day sport.
100%.
This is modern day sport.
It's all about where they can attract the biggest numbers. And that's why the tours will now go into the US and China and stuff like that.
And look, it's the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
And what do? They entertain us. There's no question about it.
Exactly.
But hopefully with gunning to Old Trafford, maybe we could change it. With fans, come on guys, let's get Manchester United to South Africa, gunning to Old Trafford. So yeah, hopefully.
We wish.
We wish. So Doc, we spoke about the 60s, the 70s, and then a little bit about Ron Atkinson bringing Brian Robson in. And then a certain Sir Alex Ferguson, obviously Alex at the time, not Sir Alex, came into Manchester United. He had a bit of a rough patch at the beginning, but then saw an upturn in the success or the luck of Manchester United. Yeah. And how's that roller coaster then as a Man United fan?
So if you're a Man United fan, for example, my youngest son's born in 1993.
Okay.
And I did a fabulous job of brainwashing him to become a United fan. So from that point in time, let's say till 2013, he knows nothing other than winners. They're winners all the time, So for that age group, it's magnificent. Yes. For guys like myself, we waited from 1967 to 1993, 26 years to win the league again. And that first league win, that was incredible. That was absolutely incredible. But what he did, in today's times, Ferguson wouldn't have survived. He would have been fired after a season or two. But he came with a plan, and he had a board and a chairman that believed in him. He didn't have the Glazers hovering over him.
Martin Edwards.
Yeah. So he had Martin Edwards, and he had a board that believed in him. And in fact, Martin Edwards written a very nice book. And the thing that stands out to me, his father was a bit of a dubious character, Louis Edwards, but it was also the chairman of Man United. But Martin Edwards did a lot to improve facilities at United, putting money back in, etc. Then, of course, you have Fergie arriving saying, listen, I don't care who you are, nobody's bigger than the club. And we saw this drinking culture that was not unique to United. It was at every single club.
Yes.
And we saw this drinking culture obliterated. And who did the axe fall upon? Mainly Norman Whiteside and Paul McGrath, two magnificent players, but he wheedled them out because of this. And of course, Brian Robson was one of the chief instigators. But Brian Robson was untouchable because Brian Robson, I'm told, I don't speak from first hand, but I'm told could get wasted the night before, and at training the next day, he was 100%.
Wow.
100%. You know, just, and you know, when you look at Brian Robson, he's a wisp of a fellow. He's not a big guy.
Yeah.
And we've been lucky enough to have Lee Sharp as a guest here on a few occasions. And Lee Sharp, in talking about Brian Robson, just made the point that Brian Robson ran the game. He ran the tempo of the game. He ran the referee. He ran everything. He was the man.
Legend.
And just so brave. Such a strong player, so brave. And it got him into trouble because he got so many injuries.
Yeah.
Brian Robson played 90 games for England. He missed 35 England games through injury.
Lineker was talking that if Robson was available in 86
Yeah,
and 90,
yeah.
because he got injured,
Yeah.
that England would have had two more World Cups.
It's just a sublime player. You know, you can always, I think one can almost speak on the same breath of Brian Robson and Duncan Edwards.
Ooh.
You know, I just,
That's a big comparison.
for me, but you know, these are debates. So then, of course, success comes to Fergie winning the FA Cup for the first time in 1990.
Very prestigious trophy back in the
Very
day.
prestigious
The
trophy. It was a great time.
has
Prestige has
dwindled a bit.
waned terribly. Yeah.
I mean, I remember, Doc, sorry, I remember that Saturday afternoon, it's FA Cup final,
Yeah.
everybody,
Yeah, yeah.
and
Big
whoever's
time.
playing in it,
Doesn't
Don't
matter.
matter.
you're going to be watching.
Place comes to a halt.
That's how prestigious
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
Amazing cup.
Yeah. So we won the cup in 1990, and it took a replay, obviously, against Crystal Palace. And it took a lot of guts to drop goalkeeper Jim Leighton from the first game, and Les Seeley played in the replay. And from then, it kicked off. We won the Cup Winners' Cup the next season. And then the following season, it looked like we were going to win the league. And came this fixture congestion right at the end of the season. And we had to go to Anfield, and we lost at Anfield. It was a terrible day. And they relate a story, and in fact, Ryan Giggs has related the same story to us, that after that game, players came and asked, supporters came and asked Giggs and Lee Sharp for their signatures. And they were Liverpool supporters, and they tore them up in front of them.
Oh,
And on the team bus came apparently one of Fergie's legendary motivational talks, saying, don't ever forget this, because we're going to come back stronger, which of course we did the following season.
Yes.
So we win the league in 93, we win the double in 94. 95 is the season that Eric Cantona gets suspended.
Yeah.
So we're without Cantona for much of the season. We finish, I think, second in the league and runners-up in the FA Cup. 96, we win the double. 97, we win the league. 98, the bloody Gooners win the league.
Yeah.
Yes.
Arsene Wenger.
Arsene Wenger.
Yeah.
Arsene who? You know, that was a famous quote.
Yeah, man.
And then, of course, came the magical treble.
Yeah, the treble.
You know, then came
That's
the
So
treble.
now on the treble, and I have to ask, after seeing all of the memorabilia, and you know, you being such a avid Manchester United fan, were you in Barcelona that night when Solskjaer and Sheringham took us to another level?
In a short answer, no. And at this point in time, if my wife is watching this, I'd like her to turn this off for the next few minutes. Okay. So in 99, through the supporters club and the club, I had a ticket for the final in Barcelona, which I think if you ask any United fan, that it must be the greatest night in the history of the club.
Exactly.
Yes.
As not luck, as misfortune would have it, we had a family function in Chicago.
Oui.
And my good wife, whom I love more than I love Man United, hope she's watching this, said to me, we are going to the function in Chicago.
Oh.
There's no discussion around this, and if you think you're going to the football to the effect of you need to find another wife now, she's one on the planet. There is no one other than her. So that was it. So I had to give up my ticket. Now, of course, in America in 1999, there's not a lot of English football on TV or things like that. But on the day of the Champions League final, we were in Disney World. So we went and did all the Disney stuff, and we came back to the timeshare that we were renting. And I was flicking through. In fact, that morning, my wife said to me, do you think you're going to win the treble? I said to her, the script is written. We're going to win the treble.
We're taking it.
So we come back, and I put on the TV, and ESPN is showing the final.
Oh,
Wow.
And it's about 68 minutes into the final, and Bayern are winning 1-0. And she says to me, well, it looks like your script writers have got it wrong. And lo and behold, we equalise, and then Solskjaer scores the winner. I opened the door, and I ran outside, yelling and screaming that people were opening doors, coming outside to find out what is going on here. And in fact, the next day, still at the Disney complex, suddenly, wherever you look, there are guys in Man United shirts and high-fiving everybody. And that's it. But this is a big regret of mine that I wasn't there that night.
Well, like you said, Doc, it was a tough decision.
Yeah.
And you chose the right side of the decision. So
It was a no-brainer.
it was a
no-brainer.
100%.
Wow.
So, I mean, obviously, I think that then leads to the next question. Sorry, Abdul, if I'm running
No,
with this.
please.
So you've missed the 99 Champions League final. And you've said that you've been to Old Trafford, more than 80
About
times
80
probably?
times, I think, yeah.
And I think if you have to dive into all of them, that's a segment on its own. But if you had to maybe just tell us, the first game that you watched live,
Yeah.
and the last time you've been to
Yeah.
watch Manchester
Sure.
United live, and just some of the emotions.
So the first game I watched live was in 1983,
83.
Man United versus Watford.
Yeah.
And it was a few weeks before the FA Cup final of 1983, which of course we beat Brighton in. Now, playing for Man United on that day, in fact, Gary Bailey wasn't playing. United had a goalkeeper called Jeff Whelans on loan from Birmingham. He was in goals. And interestingly, in the United team that day was Laurie Cunningham. And
A little bit too back.
so
for
Laurie
me, Doc.
Cunningham was also at West Brom.
Okay.
He was a brilliant player, played on the wing for England. And they used to, West Brom under Ron Atkinson had some fabulous black players in the team. And in those days, in the late 70s, early 80s, there were not a lot of black players in English football. And they had Laurie Cunningham, they had Brendan Batson, and there was one other one, Atkinson, I think, and they called them the 3 Degrees. And these guys were magnificent players. And he brought Laurie Cunningham on loan to United. And in that game against Watford, for whom on the day John Barnes was playing, who Fergie regarded as the biggest mistake, him and Gascoigne never getting those to United. But Laurie Cunningham scored with a bicycle kick. So it was a great occasion, and he was in contention to play in the FA Cup final, but he was injured. And his story is a tragic one, Laurie Cunningham, because he subsequently went to play for Real Madrid, and he died in a car crash in Madrid. And he was a great player. So that was my first experience at Old Trafford.
Brilliant.
And just if I may, the next game that I watched, because it was on the same visit, was United versus Arsenal in the FA Cup semi-final of 1983, in which Norman Whiteside scored an absolute cracker. It's on the walls there it is.
To all your fans, we're going to take a picture of that and drop it in so that you can see that.
So that was that was my first experience. My last experience at Old Trafford was pre-COVID in the first game of the 2019 season, United versus Chelsea. We beat them 4-0. We thought, this is it.
Daniel
Our
James
time
was
has
a
come.
debut.
Dan James scored on his debut. He came on as a sub. Marcus Rashford scored and Martial scored a couple that day. We thought, and I can tell you that Chelsea were damn unlucky. The scoreline didn't do them justice. They hit the woodwork a couple of times. But we leave as happy as Larry. Little did we know that COVID was coming.
And it was Solskjaer's first game as a permanent.
That was, I think he'd been installed before then.
But I mean, the first
It
season.
was the first season.
First season as a
Correct.
permanent coach.
First, and we're all singing Ollie's at the wheel, and we're all happy. Didn't take much for us to turn on him, of course. And we're all happy because we've got Pogba and we've got
Harry Maguire just signed.
and it was Harry Maguire and Aaron Wan-Bissaka's.
Bissaka,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. And I was, if I may, an anecdote about
Yeah,
that. So that night, that day, I took my son. It was his birthday, and him and a friend of his. So I said, "Where do you want to go for dinner?" So they wanted to go to Rosso, which is Rio Ferdinand's restaurant. Okay. So we're sitting in Rosso, and these guys walk in, and my son says to me, "Isn't that Wan-Bissaka?" And it was.
Wow.
So no trouble to us. We go up and we say to the guy, "Oh, well played today," or whatever. Took some photos with him, and my son sent the photo via WhatsApp to a mate of his over here. And his friend's response to that was, and please excuse me, this is not, I do not mean to blaspheme. His response to it was, Jesus, okay?
Yeah.
We look around, and at the table down there sits Gabriel Jesus at the table. So we took like a long distance picture of him, and we sent that to him, and we said, "Yeah, he's also here."
I mean, it's City at the time, so.
And where were you on that night, Ivan?
So, Doc, I
Please
watched that
surprise
game,
us.
not at Old Trafford, in Cambodia.
Wow.
So I was in Cambodia and Vietnam for a bit of a stint. I think I was there for 3 weeks. And I can't miss the Manchester United game.
No.
So I had to find a place to watch it. And because of the time difference, it was in the early hours of the morning.
Oh, wow.
My dad was in the bed next door. And I was there and he was like, "Turn it down. It's like, it's this." And I've been watching
Were
the
you
game.
streaming it?
Streaming it. It was amazing. So at least there's some linkage between you watching it at Old
Absolutely.
Trafford
And you
and me
watching
sitting in
Cambodia.
Cambodia and watching it.
Absolutely. Brilliant.
Brilliant stuff.
Wow.
Sure.
It was amazing.
That was amazing.
That was
Doc,
amazing.
before we end the segment, and my first, the first time I was introduced to you, not personally, but through a person by the name of Mohsin Desu, he told me to follow you on Twitter. Because he said, if there's any Manchester United fan in South Africa you want to be following, it's Dr. Berry. And I started following you, and it's Doc United.
Yeah.
So I love
Inspiring,
it.
yeah.
But Doc, the name, was it the first choice when you opened up your Twitter account and your socials, or did you have to give it a bit of a think and
Nothing.
straight Doc United?
Yeah.
I love it.
It's beautiful.
So anybody who ever goes in to see Doc, please refer to him as Doc United going forward. Because
Probably by my first name. It's a lot less informal.
no, brilliant stuff.
Wow, it
Brilliant
was
stuff.
absolutely amazing. Guys, please don't forget to like, comment, share, hit that bell notification, subscribe in conversation with none other than Dr. Barry Schmeizer. It's been an absolute honor, sir. And wow, it's
Lovely to speak to you guys.
Yeah, it's
I
been
still
amazing.
feel, fans out there, I still feel like I'm in dreamland. As an Arsenal supporter, I'm still in ecstasy. Look at this around. I just can't believe
And
it.
we
We're gonna convert you.
I'm already holding the.
We're gonna convert.
the
He's holding it dear.
I hope they don't get upset with me on my Arsenal buddies. But the respect is, I
You
know.
haven't seen what's been printed on your back while you're sitting on that
No
chair.
problems, guys. We'll drop that into the comments here. Doctor, thank you.
And guys, this is not the only segment with Doc. We're going to run through other segments. So make sure that you've hit that bell notification so that you are updated with anything. Doc, any last words before we close off the stream?
Last words. A special hello to all my fellow Reds and to all those non-Man United supporters. The saying goes, hated, adored, but never ignored. And that's, that's Man United.
100%.
But please remember that even as hardcore United fans, we should maintain at least a level of respect for our opposition. except Liverpool.
Love football, 100%. So thank you guys, really enjoyed the segment, and please remember to like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification, and
before we go off,
yes,
Doc, you're going to join us with us, and this is how we end. On 3, we're all going to go gunning to Old Trafford. Are you ready, Doc?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's go. 3, 2, 1. We are
Gunning to Old Trafford.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.